Yep. I'm late. I get it. A lot of questions this week. Well, I'll have to be disciplined. Tardy. That says right, Bryson. I do owe you a conversation. I know. Oh gosh, where's my line from last week? Not last week, last month. Probably no. I'll be on vacation the first Friday of August, so I don't think there'll be a Discord no more for today. Okay. All right. Good. We're here. I have to set up another screen to make sure I can manage comments if I need to. Sorry about the delay. Just setting up stuff. I'm here all by myself. That's Rick has a job. He helps with a lot. He's got a job. Ooh, Tom Holland has a new video out on Unheard. Studio live content, live view on YouTube. Mute that thing. All right. We are in business. Our patience has been rewarded. Thank you, Aaron. Those are your very kind words. Hi, Andrew. LDS. It's a very sweet comment. All right. On to the questions. I'm going to turn my fan on because it's not going to be real hot today. We've only had one real hot spell in Sacramento. That's very unusual for Sacramento. Usually it's blazing by this time of year. Okay. First question. Indie defense. Ooh, let me share the screen now. Share screen. Entire screen. That's the one. Bang. Here we are. Indie defense. How can I have another conversation with you? We spoke 2 years ago, and I've changed and learned a lot since then. I bookmarked your Calendly page a few. So, yeah, Sam commented the other week that Calendly is in some ways broken. It's not broken because there's anything wrong with Calendly. It's broken because of me. And I always warned you about this. This is part of the reason I never wanted the channel to grow very big. It's because so right now that there continues to be what all of you watched for like that weird week of watching the Christian Reform Synod. The conversations continue, and still people are complaining about calling the question and not hearing everyone and like my favorite Protestant. Well, thank you. The truth is that there's only so many hours in a day and only so many days in a week. And a lot of my time is taken up with eating and sleeping and doing the work of the church and having to use this channel to think about the things I need to think about. And that comes out in the monologues and the commentaries. And then part of what is so uncomfortable for me about my internet life is that there are so many of you and just limited amounts of me. And every time I meet a new one of you, I only get to scratch the surface. I only see, an hour of you or 2 hours of you. And then you don't go away. And then I meet another one of you and another one of you. And relationships sort of go like that. And I've got to maintain my relationships with my wife, with my children, with the people at my church, my elders and deacons that I'm responsible to, my colleagues, my neighbors, on and on and on and on and on. So you guys just keep coming. And I want to keep an open door. And the truth is, the longer I do this and the more of delegate. Yeah, it's not a matter of delegating stuff. See, it's weird because the things that allow me to do this are also some of the reasons it's getting increasingly difficult to delegate. The more the church dies, certain things sort of land on my plate. You know, generally in the Christian Reformed Church, our elders and deacons rotate in 3-year terms. We haven't had any elder and deacon rotation. And what that means that in some ways the church is getting towards non-viable. And so that then raises questions that are also time consuming. Should we revert to unorganized status and come under one of our daughter churches that we helped to plant, 15, 20 years ago, which is kind of a good thing. But that adds complexity and it all changes my time. So in other words, and also all the synod videos that I did. Here's a funny thing. So when I started making regular videos for you guys, it was hard to find me. You had to, not too hard, figure out my email address. You could find me on Twitter. You could get to me one way or another. But the Christian Reformed videos that I've done, a lot of Christian Reformed people found that and then found me. And are like, oh, I want to talk to this man. Well, if you're a YouTuber and meaning you watch YouTube and there's a new YouTube channel you're watching and you think, oh, I'd like to talk to this person. I probably can't talk to this person because they're out there in YouTube land and I would need a special relationship or a special connect or something to get to that person because YouTube by design puts up sort of a wall, a screen between us. Well, when a bunch of people in the Christian Reformed Church found my videos, they don't watch a lot of YouTube. And they just see another Christian Reformed minister talking to them. Like, I want to talk to Paul. So what do you do if you're a member of the Christian Reformed Church and you decide you want to talk to Paul? Oh, I'll just pull out the directory of Christian Reformed ministers. There's Paul. Here's his number. I'm going to give him a call. So I've been on the phone and I've gotten emails and I'm really grateful for it. But the numbers, the channel has grown because of the Christian Reformed stuff. But that's totally different because all of you people who are like YouTube junkies, you sort of have your own rituals and traditions about how these relationships work. And I've always tried, as Griz says, to break the fourth wall to the degree that I can. And the randos conversations have been a part of that. And that's been a whole thing that has grown. And it's a thing I love. And it's a thing I'm committed to keep doing. But the way this works, and I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. I'm just preaching on 1 Corinthians 16 when the Apostle Paul says, at the beginning of the week, set aside your earnings or your profits, your excess, so that when I come, I can make the collection. Well, yeah, Phil Nickerson is the true randos fan because he went through all the randos videos and he left comments on them. So he knew that I was going through them. But anyway, I knew he was going through them. So anyway, where was I going with this? Oh, it's so bad. My ADHD is so bad. So what happens is, at the beginning of the week, the collection. At the beginning of the week, I look at my calendar and I don't have any slots set aside for Paralandra commentary, for Jordan Peterson commentary, for Grail Country, I don't have any slots set aside for doing commentary or therapy videos. My monologues are my therapy videos. I don't have any commentary for that. Then no time away for that. I knew I had to do more CRC videos because CRC is my people. They're my church. They're my home. I want to help. I want to help the conversation. I want to help the CRC have conversation. So I've been trying to do more of those. And now, because I'm involved, the conversation has different levels. And so there's one level. And so of other people on the internet, of other people who are, gosh, how to describe this, other people who have a certain degree of status in the conversation. And because I have a degree of status in the conversations, it's important that I talk to them. So my conversation with Richard Beck, my conversations with Jonathan Peugeot and John Vervaeke, my conversation with Richard Rohlin. This week, I have scheduled a conversation with someone else who you'll recognize. I won't give the name yet. This week, I was going to do a warm-up conversation for the Washington event, and because of scheduling, that fell through. But it fell through the morning of, and so I couldn't just open up Calendly slots and have those things filled. And I've still got some promised conversations to the Lowry boys and to a bunch of Chino people that I haven't forgotten. So some randos conversations are in some ways already promised. So it's tough getting those slots right now. Also because, as I said before, summers are different because my wife is off work and available. And through the rest of the school year, she works 5 days a week fixed because she's got a rigid school schedule. I work Sundays because I'm a working minister. Saturday is our only joint day off together. So I protect Saturdays very fiercely because Saturday is really the only day that my wife and I get to do anything. So a lot of people are like, I want to talk. Can we talk on a Saturday? No, can't talk on a Saturday. When I do conferences, that eats up on my Saturdays. So I'm very zealous about my Saturdays, which means that unfortunately, Randos has taken a hit lately, and I want to get back to it. So the way Randos works are Sunday or Monday, I look at my calendar for the next week and I see, what can I do? How many rando slots can I have? And if I look and I say I can open it up, I open it up and they go almost right away. And that's the way it works. And some weeks I can't open it up, and summers are especially bad. And after, you're not going to hear, I don't know what you're going to hear from me between July 17 and August 17. Yeah, that's a whole month. And now I've just added, in my own insanity, this whole membership thing, which I'm kind of having fun with because I can drop stuff in the membership slots that I don't quite dare dropping into the other slots. And there's about 30 or 40 members, and there's 3 tiers. There's the in the door tier, which is like $2.99 a month. Yeah, that's like no money. And I'm going to put, I'm going to do a question and answer for all of the members. That's going to be in there. You get special stuff. Like, you don't get a lot for your $3 a month because it's $3 a month. But there will be a few things. And then for the $6.99 slot, I entitled that something like no wait, no ads, because like with the Bishop Barron video this morning, I made that video yesterday and that was a mess. I really want to talk about this crazy show, Mrs. Davis. But Bishop Barron, I think, led us a little astray, even though everything he said was right. Expectations he raised were interesting. And that show's all about the Grail, which has led me down a Grail rabbit trail lately. And I'm trying to get up to speed on Grail stuff. We have a whole channel called Grail Country in this little corner. So trying to get up to speed on Grail stuff. And because Mrs. Davis is weird, it's disturbing. I don't know if it's important or not. Do a couple of randos conversations. That will clear out the new CRC raffle. And so, yeah, the rest is history. Grail was good. It was. And it's very different, of course, from Peugeot and Rohlin. I just listened to Griz's Rohlin conversation. Oh, it was so good. It was so good. And I want to clip that sucker up, and I want to maybe I'll ask if I can edit it and repost it on my channel. It was so good. And I'm behind in a lot of important videos anyway. So there's a lot I want to do and a lot I want to keep doing. And I want to keep doing the randos. And someone at the conference said, you should go back and talk to your old randos, just like you're talking indie defense. And I think he's right. So don't give up. Don't give up on me, baby. Don't give up. There's a 1970s song about that. Don't give up. I want to get back to the randos because one of the cool things that's happening, Justin Wells was in Livingstone's. Justin Wells was at Livingstone's. Justin Wells's conversation with Karen on the Meaning Code channel, another outstanding conversation. Deserved its own video from me. I just haven't had time to do it. So the $6.99 member level, like I posted the Bishop Barron video there yesterday. People could chew on it, and I released it this morning. I'm continuing to play with all of this. You know, when Sam said, well, the Calendly thing is kind of broken, he's right. And I'm just trying to deal with, well, just basically volume. So I'm working on this. So yeah, because for me, the randos conversations, they're a real joy. The randos conversations are the open frontier of this channel, where it's kind of the mouth of the estuary, where I turn on that camera and I have no idea who or what I'm going to be talking to or about. And again, not all of them come through Calendly, and not all of them are recorded, and not all of them are shared. And often the best randos conversations will never be shared. And many of them have never been recorded because they're pastoral conversations and they're real people's lives. And those are holy moments. So I have no idea what right from the start, this channel was making stuff up as I go along. And in many ways, that's still the case. That's right, Phil. When we've been there 10,000 years, we'll no less days to have randos conversations than when we first begun. In fact, we'll have way more. And I believe that. So, yep, I open slots on Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, usually for Wednesday. I'm thinking of altering Calendly to have a little bit more flexibility of when I can do randos conversations. Because right now it's sort of Wednesday morning. That's hard for dealing with people in Asia, like Australia and the other Far East. That time zone is tough for me to do. I also do most of this during sort of business hours on the West Coast. And the reason for that, again, is I try to keep evenings. I try to hold as many evenings for my wife as I can, because again, we don't get long weekends. Most people, they'll get like a long weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, get to go away. We can't do any of that because of our two jobs. So yeah, it's a mess. Would you take therapy from a Peterson GPT? Would you transcend your Dunbar number by recommending randos to have conversations with PVK GPT? That's such an interesting question, John. I definitely wouldn't take therapy. Number one, this is going to happen. If you look at the replica, I talked about that early on. That was like one of my first AI videos that I made. I haven't made many, but for some reason, I don't sit on this chair like I used to. I have to figure that out. See, I am an embodied individual. Yeah, a little bit manic this morning, but that's because I ran here into church. I just remembered Donald Trump's comment about a remarkably stable genius. It's a crazy world we live in. Okay. The AI replica app was intended to be a quasi-therapeutic resource for people. That's been an interesting thing. We're just beginning to think about and experience and explore the complexity of these machines we're creating. That process is going to be a while, and there are going to be many happy and sad surprises. On Twitter this week, Kyle had a conversation with Karen and Luke and Nate about This Hideous Strength, which is another project that I'm still working on. That Hideous Strength. See the third in the Lewis Space trilogy. And then Kyle was talking about basically artificial wombs and growing human beings in bags instead of in human wombs. As I look at AI and like the transhumanist stuff, this is all connected. No artificial wombs. Thank you, Eric. I'm against it too. Because all of this technological, part of the reason technology has all of these unintended consequences is because of exactly the reasons we talk about in this little corner with respect to the acknowledgement that the world is more complex than we can fathom. And that certainly goes for the human psyche in terms of AI therapy or pastoring. And it certainly goes in terms of the knitting together of a human being in its mother's womb. I can't get the camera right. I can very much imagine, probably in China, this attempt to grow artificial human beings. And we will discover, just like we're discovering with AI and with how many others of our technologies, that there are unintended benefits and consequences that delight us and horrify us. That's going to continue. You know, when Peugeot keeps talking about how weird the world is going to get, he's right. Things are going to keep getting weird and weirder. Part of the real challenge that we've been dealing with since the scientific and then industrial revolution is, can we as an extended body say no to ourselves? But hasn't that always been a deep part of the human religious challenge? Why is it that the entire conversation with respect to desire or epithumia is the shape it is, not just in the Christian tradition, but in many traditions? The advent of nuclear weapons had a sobering effect on our technological hubris. The concern about environmental degradation and catastrophe is having a sobering effect on our technological avarice. This is going to be one of the big issues of humanity going forward. And so, yeah, there will be a Peterson GPT. There will be a PVK GPT. Even if I'm against it and don't like it, if this channel would grow larger, one of you out there would take all of my videos and everything that I've done on the internet and add some. There would be a TLC GPT. We already have a TLC search engine. That's the next step. And you can have it, you'll be able to talk to it. And it'll have Peugeot and PVK and Vervaeke and Peterson and Richard Rohlin and Nate, and it'll have all of us in it, and it'll sound like us, and it will be a lot like us. It's coming, and it's coming soon. Within years, not even decades, there will be a TLC-GPT. It's coming. Now, how that pans out, will that help with my randos conversations? Probably, because people have the sense that they're talking to me. And a lot of what already, when it comes to our conversations are already a mixture of, I challenge AI to model. Luke, you're not that hard to model. You're not that hard to model. I'm sorry. We've all been mapping you since the day you exploded on our screens, Luke. We love you, but it's that way. If there can be a Luke whisperer, then you can be modeled. That's now your second thing. Your point right here is true. Whoops. That's true. And that's wait a minute. And that's exactly where I was going with this. On one hand, you can get a PVK randos experience from GPT probably within the next 5 to 6 years. But it won't be the same as talking to me, because what happens is that dynamic has already happened, because I have already, when I have a randos conversation, there's some mixture of me and projection of me. This is built into us psychologically. So when you're having a conversation with PVK GPT, it'll be the same thing. There'll already be projection. In other words, whether you're talking to the GPT or whether you're talking to me, a good bit of your conversation with me will be projection. And the less you actually know me, the more of that is projection. And so those formulas will be constant between PVK and PVK GPT. But PVK will already, to some degree, have done some mapping of PVK GPT. And so the real PVK will always be a little bit different than PVK GPT. And so that's going to be an arms race. But we're going to acclimate to that arms race. There will be a Peugeot GPT. And Peugeot might, well, Peugeot's he's actually a pretty amicable guy. But a Jay Dyer GPT, let's say, someone who's a little bit less agreeable than Jonathan Peugeot, someone will make it. He might say, I hate that you've made it. Doesn't matter. Somebody's going to make it. And if there's a market for it, somebody's going to deploy it. And I don't even mean a financial market, because so much of what we're doing on the internet has no financial consideration. People just do it for fun. So that's all coming. But those who exclusivity will continue to have status. And people will be like, I can talk to PVK GPT all I want. And others will say, but I talked with the real Paul Vanderklay. I talked with the real Jonathan Peugeot. I was there when Jordan Peterson talked about C16. I watched the biblical series. So those dynamics also aren't going away. I said I was going to be more efficient, and I'm not doing it. Okay, Michigan Man Sam, is there a strong biblical case for post-millennial eschatology? If by post-millennial eschatology you mean, see the word public service announcement, pre-mill, post-mill, all-mill, all relies on this perceived millennium, this 1,000-year reign that you can find in the book of Revelation, and how you regard that. One way of characterizing pre-mill, a-mill, and post-mill is pre-mill say everything's going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then you have like for some pre-mills, then you have this rapture and a tribulation, and then Jesus comes, yada, yada, yada. Post-mills have their own eschatological formula where in some ways things get better and better and better. And then you kind of run up to this 1,000-year reign. A-mills basically say that 1,000 years isn't what you think it is. It's sort of already upon us, and we're sort of already in it. But A-mills basically say, I don't know. They're not looking for a literal or a physical or a temporal 1,000 years in terms of a chronological timeline. And I actually think that this pre-mill, post-mill, and a-mill, as constructed, as I just described it, is in some ways a function of modernity. So as modernity recedes, these categories are going to get increasingly fishy. And part of the difficulty with this is, so politicians do like right track, wrong track polling. The nation is on the right track. The nation is on the wrong track. There is no track. There is no track. We naturally, again, my rule about consciousness or attention or awareness is sort of monofocal. If something is monofocal, dualisms naturally develop. It's A/B testing. This, not this. This, not this. And we take the enormous complexity of the world and we turn it into good and bad, right and wrong, black and white. So all that antithetical stuff, it's a function of the monofocality of attention. Because if you can really only pay attention to one thing, there's this and not this, which makes 3 sort of the mystical number. Because once you're doing ABC, your task switching has just sort of exploded, because it can be AC or AB, AC or AB, and it's sort of like math, the way I imagine this working. So that's why 3s are important. And anything beyond 3 is just using the existing machinery to try to manage more complexity. Is the world getting better or worse? With respect to what? In some ways, that entire question invokes the frame problem. You need a frame to figure out your A/B testing, better or worse. So the world is going to continue until it doesn't. And until Christ, one way or another, changes the story in a dramatic way. Now, again, part of the post-mill question is, how dramatic is it going to be? And this gets into the whole question of catastrophism, let's say. There was science sort of imagined kind of a steady state thing for a while. And, the dinosaurs just kind of died off. It's just kind of this slow thing. And then, of course, wait a minute, there's this crater in the Yucatan. Do you think it's possible that an asteroid hit the world and suddenly the future changed dramatically? Yes. Well, apply that fractally. Car accident changes your life. A betrayal changes your life. A war changes your life. A heart attack changes your life. Big things happen to small creatures. Itchy back changes my life. That didn't work so well. these theological constructs are inevitable, necessary, and also more complex than we think they are. So, is there a strong biblical case for postmillennial eschatology? Yeah. Is there a biblical case for premillennial eschatology? Less so. I think Amil is the most humble and probably best approach. I mean, I continue to be a millennial. Doug Wilson being postmillennial just fascinates me. But there are certain conservative reformed people who work that post-mill thing in some really unusual and interesting ways. It's almost dispensational the way some of that has done, but dispensationalism is a product of modern ways of thinking. If you look at some of these more symbolic ways of thinking, you know, if you're a symbolist, Amil is really your only option, because that millennium is a symbol of Christ's reign. And then how does that work? So it's a good question. It was answering a question. Pastor Gregor Jacob suggested praying for one's wife to die so as to climb the ladder of religious hierarchy. If you mean Jacob, meaning our Jacob, the answer to your question is Jacob. Just listen to enough of what Jacob says. Wait for the Jacob GPT. That'll be a fun one to play with. Trust me. These are the kinds of things Jacob says. Do you ever hear me recommending that to people? No. Have I thought it? Sure. Is it a good thing? No. I have a little bit more of a filter than Jacob. Jacob is Jacob. I'm me. I have less of a filter than other people. It's just personality. What's your advice on this matter? I can't listen to the whole thing. Yeah, it's kind of a cruel joke, praying for someone else's death. And as a pastor, I'll tell you, people pray for even worse things. So Jacob is Jacob. I mean, if you watch enough Jacob, you should kind of have it figured out, because he is who he is. And people complain, and it's like, you can complain on who is who he is. And doesn't mean you have to watch his channel. Doesn't mean you have to like him. But Jacob is Jacob, as we all are. So how do you find access? I have links to the Calendly and all of my show notes, my standard thing. That's down there. Charlie is talking about it. Querido Pablo, given the obvious interest in sex and religion, maybe you could host a regular YouTube meeting to discuss just that. It could be a weekly or monthly meeting so people of different faiths can have time to prepare and decide if they want to chime in and just suggest. It's a great suggestion, Anna. It's a great suggestion. I don't know if I could sustain that given my current schedule. And I don't feel myself to necessarily have expertise in that. To sustain something like that, I think requires, Preston Sprinkle has basically devoted the last 5 of his years of his life to this issue and has kind of done that. I'm going to scratch my back on the door frame. Hang on. Much better. Sex is so complex. Religion even more so. These are endemic conversations that are not ending. I can do all these fun things too. Okay, next question, because I know you've got another good question coming up, Anna. Pastor Paul, consider that there are multiple sources of evidence. Ask and ye shall receive. That, oh boy, Greg, you're asking a lot of interesting questions this week. That both fellatio that ends in swallowing and cunnilingus that ends in orgasm is proven to increase rates of fertility between that man with that woman. Does this affect your thoughts on oral sex not being procreative? Look at everybody's. Number one, it does not affect my thoughts on oral sex not being procreative. Oral sex isn't procreative. Now, given what you've just said, and if it's true, does a couple who has sex with each other doing these things mean that this increases their fertility? Apparently so. I'm not going to, I don't know if that's true or not true. I've never been on record saying that a husband and wife cannot do these things. It's not my position. I think a husband and wife can do those things. I don't think it's immoral. You know, I think a husband and wife can enjoy this. That's my position. So you're going to have to take it up with someone who says they shouldn't. Hey, Pastor Paul, I hope you're doing well. What do you think of the monarchical Trinity? Could this concept bring back the Unitarians? I remember hearing Peugeot make a comment about, trying to avoid Trinitarian conversations. And I'm kind of with him on that. Not because I don't think the Trinity is important, not because I don't think the Trinity is true, but because Trinitarian conversations are super complex. They're complex historically, they're complex philosophically, and they're enormously complex pastorally. So, yeah. I guess that's my answer to that. What do you like best, Sundays or Sundays? The word spelled differently. I like ice cream. I like it more than I should. I love Sundays. I love coming to church. I love meeting my peeps. I love teaching. I love worship. I love talking with people. I love them both. Sometimes I have ice cream at church. That's like the best of both worlds. What do you think? Why do you think Jordan Peterson has paid? Why do you think Jordan Peterson has paid virtually no attention in his speaking or writing, as far as I can tell, to the Pauline corpus and everything between the Gospels and Revelation, especially given the fact that Paul is perhaps the single greatest psychological thinker in history? Can't wait to hear Jacob's response to that. Jacob. Yeah, see, Jacob is Jacob. I mean, that's how to deal with people. Number one, people are who they are, and you have very limited capacity to change that. That's rule number one. Rule number two, it doesn't mean you can't try. Rule number three, if you do try, have a little bit of humility and humor and understanding about your endeavor. See, 3 rules, and definitely apply them to dealing with Jacob or Hank or anybody else that'll show up in a live chat like this. Because if they're chatting with randos on the internet, they're interesting characters to begin with. I think Jordan Peterson has paid no attention to Paul because let me say it this way. if you look at my sermons over the last few years, you might say, wow, PVK has spent a lot of time thinking and talking about Paul. And that's true. If you look at my preaching and teaching before the last 3 to 4 years, you would say Paul Vanderklay has spent almost no time directly dealing with the epistles. Now, someone might say, well, that's really weird because in Reformed Protestant circles, they almost tend to really focus a lot more on Paul than any other portion of the Bible, because that's kind of what happened in a lot of reformational theology. Luther read Paul in a certain way, and that kind of became standard talking points for Protestant Christians. I just tended to find the Old Testament and the Gospels more interesting than Paul, partly because of the reformational, the tradition of reformational theology, which was not doubted on my part, but fairly mapped in a particular way. The longer I studied the Old Testament and the Gospels, the more I realized just how complex the Pauline epistles are. There's a weird duality with the Pauline epistles that on one hand, we know more about the author of the Pauline epistles than we know about just about anybody else in the entire Bible historically. And when I say that, I mean that in terms of modern history. That feeds into the minimal facts argument that Gary Habermas has made. Paul, even people who are skeptical about the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth are not skeptical about the historicity of Paul of Tarsus. The more you know about something, the more you know you don't know. And so I've been, like, over the last few months, going through 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians is one of these books in the New Testament that nobody with any sense at all is skeptical about the authorship of Paul of Tarsus of that book. There are passages in that book that, quite frankly, we have no idea what to do with. That whole women head covering, long hair business. That in 1 Corinthians 15, you have that verse about baptism of the dead, which Mormons have sort of run with, but we have no idea what to do with that verse. And part of the reason we have no idea what to do with so much of this is because we know so much about it and we know what it can't mean. I think part of the reason, if you look at how Jordan has managed the Bible, he's mostly addressed symbolic narrative. And if you're looking for symbolic narrative, look at Genesis, Exodus, and parables. That's what Jordan Peterson's interested in. He's interested in symbolism. He's a Jungian. So that's why Jordan mostly looks at biblical narrative and biblical symbolism. You also don't see him dealing much with the bulk of the Old Testament, which is the prophecy literature. Isaiah, Jeremiah, the minor prophets. He doesn't deal with that. He'll deal with Daniel before he deals with those, again, because of the symbolism. So that's why Jordan's view of the Bible that's probably why Jordan's view of the Bible is the way it is. And also because part of what happened in the Protestant Reformation, I don't really have language for this, but Paul was sort of mapped hard. And so when a lot of people read the epistles, remember how I said having a talk with me is a good bit projection and some PVK peeking through? That's the same thing is true about reading anything, including reading the Bible. we project eisegesis. We're projecting the interpretation on the text we're reading. One of the things when you first start, if you're a careful reader, one of the things that you begin to learn is you are your own worst enemy in reading a text. And one of the hardest things is to get beyond reading into a text what you think should be there. I mean, Genesis 1 is a great example of that. And in some ways, you might say, symbolism. In some ways, symbolism's even worse. That dynamic is always with us by virtue of our psychology. The only way we can sort of encounter the world is if we work with our maps, archetypes, stereotypes, biases. And when it comes to Jordan Peterson, that is what he keeps talking about when he keeps talking about the fact of how hard science is to do. And Chris Kavanaugh just said something recently on Twitter again that says something like, about how Jordan Peterson views science. And Jordan is right. Science is really hard. And texts are really hard. Learning anything real in this world is really hard. Analogy and symbolism are necessary because analogy and symbolism is the way that we do this synthesis and appropriation. This little section of Richard Rohlin talking about synthesis with Grimm yesterday, wow, so good and so true. That's how we digest the world. And the same is true of texts. And so Peterson, these are the texts that are of interest to him because of his project. For Jordan to really get a handle on the Pauline corpus of the New Testament, so Chris Kavanaugh is right in some things, in that we all have our own specialties, and when we venture outside of our specialties, there's danger. Chris Kavanaugh is completely wrong in the fact that we all do it all the time, and we all have to all the time. Just have to. You have to synthesize the world in order to live in it. You might say, well, you have no expertise in making up decisions about vaccines or viruses. And it's like, yeah, but you have absolute necessity in making it, and you're going to figure this stuff out depending on the information coming at you. It's called sense making. We all have to do it. So some of Jordan's strengths are obviously in psychology and to a degree philosophy, which is quite close to psychology in some ways. A lot of Jordan's weaknesses in his education are in history. And he said that on a number of occasions, that he doesn't know anywhere near as much history as he should. And that's true. And the areas of, certainly Paul of Tarsus impacted psychology, but the domains of knowledge to know, the domains of croissant, the domains of knowledge needed, Jordan's probably not going to delve into Paul hardly at all. Vervaeke's done more, but Vervaeke's got much more of a historical, philosophical pedigree than Jordan. Look at Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. It's basically a philosophical endeavor. And Jordan is more of a psychologist, and John Vervaeke is more of a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. It's different. So you'll sooner see Vervaeke wrestle with Paul of Tarsus than Jordan. It's the best answer I can give right now. Well, so some of these are answering questions that are already in the comments. Pastor Paul, would you like to try and get a conversation between you and Professor Edward Dutton arranged, or at least some form of that connection? I left some relevant information in my potential in the self-promo Professor Dutton has been interviewed by Benjamin Boyce. I'd have to look at that. I don't know who Professor Dutton is. Ulysses JN, do these questions eventually appear in a video at some point? Never. Never going to happen. Doesn't happen at all. Part of the reason I make so many videos is that you can hide if you make so many videos. If there were 4 or 5 videos that I made out there, or one video in the internet of me, I would be exposed. I put out a video a day, I can hide amidst the chaos. Yeah, I answer these questions all the time. Every single one I at least read and take on, and they appear on screen. Joe Schmo, Yosef. Oh, he's answering the questions. I'll try to find those on his channel then. They're usually entitled something like Bridges of Meaning Q&A. That's where these questions appear. Pastor Paul, do you randomize the reward of being heard for the greatest impact on behavior, thus Randos United? No, I don't really randomize it. It's if I hear something that strikes a chord and resonance with me, I'll tend to amplify it. So it's not random. We're, Grim Griz. I mean, you people have to understand Grim Griz is a genius. He really is. But like many geniuses, he's hard to understand. I mean, when Richard Rohlin was trying to talk to him, Richard figured that out very quickly. Oh, gosh. But Grim Griz's domain is particular and peculiar. And so what Grim Griz has this corner nailed. He does. And he's doing stuff that are way, oh my gosh, he's going to clip this. That's going to go in his Reaper section. He's doing stuff that is way above the head of what most of us are appreciating, which is why hardly anybody watches his channel. Another reason hardly anybody watches his channel is because it's just so unusual, but genius is unusual. So I'm not surprised by what we're seeing. But when he decides to play it straight, like with some of these fringe encounters, I mean, just look at how he knows Vervaeke's work. Look at how he gets what's going on. So he talks about third lobe. Now, the James in our local meetup here, who's another brain guy, kind of corrected some of the nomenclature, but no, we are thinking together. And so I'm not really randomizing the randos. It's when we meet that things really get going. And so, yeah, it's not random. We're thinking together. We're doing sense making. We're doing synthesis between each other. And what motivates me is when I hear something or see something that it clicks. Well, why does it click? Well, it clicks for reasons I don't understand. It clicks for areas of my mind that are pre-conscious and I'm unconscious of. Doesn't mean it's right. It just means it clicks. Peter P asks hard questions. What's the relation or what is the function of historical knowledge in a world which has realized that it is better guided by myths and stories? Isn't it danger of becoming obsolete or the carrier of political agendas? Nassim Taleb's Lindy effect. Nassim Taleb is a brilliant man wrapped in a rather disagreeable personality. And often some of the best sources out there are disagreeable because they're resisting dumbed down, popular, lazy answers. But the Lindy effect basically says that things that have endured, I have my own way of saying it, which is ontology has its own justification. Things that have endured for a long time have endured for reasons. It might not even be easy to know what those reasons are, but there are reasons out there for them. And, again, listening to Richard Rohlin talk about how he's educating his children, I was listening to that and thought I should clip this and send it to my wife. She probably won't watch it anyway. But he's basically describing something similar to a Waldorf education. A Waldorf education, if you look at how Waldorf educates students, they always start with myth and stories. Some Christians and Jews love it because one of the years they do a lot of things out of the Old Testament. And here in Northern California, that freaks some people out. You're having the children learn Bible stories? It's a Waldorf education. It's sort of new agey, which is what they thought. And then they're learning Bible stories. They're learning Norse myths, and they're learning stories from all over the world. They're doing all of this in a Waldorf education. They're doing all of this universal history. And Richard Rohlin nails it in his conversation with Griz about education and about how children grow. So my wife started homeschooling when my son actually started in the Waldorf school, but at that point, my wife didn't like sort of the new agey aspects of it. And so she pulled him out. And so we homeschooled my son, and then we continued to homeschool my children. And in many ways, when my wife actually eventually started teaching at the school that she pulled her son out of because she didn't like the style of education, her opinions about education, even though they weren't formed by the Waldorf or Rudolf Steiner, were very similar, in that they were similar to what Richard Rohlin is talking about, and that they were similar to a lot of where Christian homeschooling has gone, which is often unintentionally along this path of something like mythology and universal history. And, C.S. Lewis, who under the Great Knock became an ardent early new atheist, threw it all away because he began to understand the wisdom and truth of myth. So, yeah, myth isn't going away. And, the new atheists that on one hand say all these things about an Iron Age document, yada, 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 and then look at Star Wars and say, oh, isn't that cool? You just suckers. Suckers. I thought anything that said Christian, I'm just going to throw away. But, oh, look, Lord of the Rings. You're a sucker. You've been suckered and you don't know it. You've been taken in because you're a human being and this is how we are. And we've been this way for a very long time. And just because you got a bee in your bonnet because some religious people started making comments about sexual morality and you get upset, you think you're going to just dispel your human nature? Good luck with that. It ain't happening. And you can be an idiot on the internet and think that you just deal with facts and logic, but sorry, you are who you are. And you've been set up to be this for a very long time. And that little chirping rider on the big elephant really can't do what it thinks it can. Sorry about the rant. I know some of you are here for the rants. Yeah. Now, at the same time, listen to the Paralander video I made about Weston's discovery of spirituality. This is way more complex than And I know among some of the Christians, John Vervaeke is a frustration. John Vervaeke is really smart. John Vervaeke is really honest. And again, go back to my rule about dealing with human beings, that they are who they are. And, God's going to sort us out. And I mean that in many senses of the word, sort out. In fact, God does work on sorting us out in this world, and he will on Judgment Day and into the next. And what God decides to do with people is what God is going to do. I'm a Calvinist. God gets what he wants. That's the rule. And if you want to fight with God, good luck to you. I don't think it's going to end the way you want it to. We wrestle with God, but good fathers wrestle with their children, not because they want to hurt their children, but because they want to make their children stronger and more mature and more like him. The good father wrestles with his children. That's what we do. So, yeah, all of the modernity was going to end because it was an overreach. And some people are like, oh, I can't wait till modernity's over. Well, modernity rose for its own reasons too. And there'll be overreach in the attempted putting away of modernity. And, we're seeing a lot of that being sorted out now with, discussions about math. Well, I'm not going to believe in math because it was those Greek Europeans that did so much work in it. Oh, well, good luck with that. Design a bridge without any math and see how well it holds up. Ontology has its own justification. Did you have a happy Father's Day? I spent most of Father's Day on the road. That was the weekend that my son graduated, and I had church that morning, so I had to leave Santa Cruz early and drive to Sacramento and do church, and then drive back to Santa Cruz. But I listened to a lot of Paralandra and some really cool things online, and I was able to hang out in Santa Cruz with my children and celebrate my son's graduation. So the whole weekend was great. The day was different, but the weekend was great. I'll take a happy Father's weekend. That's an answer to a question. Anna again, Pastor Pablo, how do you personally treat LGBTQ plus same-sex attracted people in your life, if you have any? If I have any, they're all over. Some of them are out and some of them are not. As a pastor, you get to hear secrets. I'm not saying that's always a happy thing. But often days, that's part of the reason why I always take a deep breath before I have a randos conversation, because I know a lot of people who pick up the randos conversations don't have anybody to tell their secrets to. And for them, I'm one of the few people they can really safely tell their secrets to, because I'm not anywhere near in their own life, sort of like a therapist. And so every time I start a really randos conversation, I sort of brace myself, because it's like, what kind of secrets am I going to hear? People's sex lives are very, very messy. And I don't just mean what they do with their bodies. There are people who have never done anything sexually with another human being, but when you hear the role that sex plays in their thinking and their mind and the other behaviors which are not overtly sexual, I think Peterson is right that Freud overplayed his hand by basically making sex the frame through which everything else can be seen. Now, Peterson's right. Sex isn't it. Jung is right. Sex is a biggie. Same-sex attraction. part of what politics does in the zeitgeist of a massive body politic, that's a spiritual entity, is create binaries. Even same-sex attracted. Within the scope of a human life, that is not anything close to the binary we might imagine it to be. Now, as I'm knocking on the door of 60 years this month, Paul, stop projecting your sexual desires onto AOC. I got to tell you, she is kind of hot. Yeah, the cake is baked. I'll say it that way, for better and for worse. The general rule with LGBTQ plus people, and what on earth does that string of letters mean, especially since we keep adding to it every 3 or 4 years? Here's the rule in dealing with people. It's called the golden rule. Treat others the way you would like to be treated. So I treat them with kindness and respect, and I don't manipulate. I don't overextend. So that's true. But that rule doesn't make others the masters of you. That deals with how to treat people face to face. Now, when it comes to policy or politics or these other collective beings, it gets way more complicated, because I have always tried to treat my children the way I would like to be treated, but there are other roles involved. I, as a parent, dealing with a 2-year-old child, did not give my 2-year-old children everything that they said they wanted at the age of 2. Does that mean I'm being paternal towards LGBTQ people? No, not at all. When they ask me what I think, I tell them what I think. But they're, someone who comes to me with whatever assortment of things that are part of their sexuality, and this one binary about same-sex attraction is one piece of an enormous puzzle. There are other issues that are far more common that I deal with all the time. What people do when they're reliably attracted to members of the other sex. It's like, yeah, if I can avoid being attracted to members of the same sex, then everything will be easy. No, not true. I try to treat people the way they would want to be treated. So I give them respect. I give them love. I don't try to manipulate them or control them. And I expect the same from them to me. I don't always get that. If I am not seeing the world or embracing the politics or theology or positions or whatever that they don't have, if they just try to lean into me to coerce or manipulate or shame or guilt or do all those tricks on me, well, for the most part, I see, yeah, you're trying to use these tricks to change my mind because you want the world to think the way you think. Well, every human being wants the world to think the way they think. We are all little masters of the universe. Gosh, is it 11:20? Oh man, I'm so bad at this. Oh man, look at all those questions. No more questions until I do another Q&A in September. I don't know why you guys, I'm so bad at this. So yeah, there are plenty of people who have same-sex attraction in my life. I might even be one of them. Dum, dum, dum. How would you know? Is there a part of me? When you really, again, as a pastor, you'll have people who will sit in your office, or now randos online, and they will open their mouths and they will tell you how the world looks through their eyes. And sexuality is, it's not everything. I agree with Peterson. It's not the frame, but it's a big deal, especially for the young. As people get older, people tend to make a degree of peace with the decisions that they've made and what they've done. And they often older people move on, not always, but often, and other things are more important to them. I take individuals as they come to me. And if they ask me my opinion, I give it. And if they don't ask me my opinion, I don't give it. They haven't asked me for my opinion. So why give it? But I listen, and I try to love, and I try to support in ways that I think are moral and right. And I continue to try to be their friends. It's like I do with everyone here. It's what I try to do. I remember one guy coming in and telling me about his sex life with his dog. Fortunately, I didn't hear that every day. Yeah. There's this old joke about, oh, don't tell the minister, because ministers don't know real life. Eugene Peterson settled that to rest. No, ministers often hear way more real life than you have any idea, because people come in and they are broken and they are hurting and they have secrets and they have to tell someone. And most people aren't going to spend $100 to $200 to $300 an hour to pay someone to listen to their secrets. And I mean the secrets they can't tell their spouses or their friends. They find a pastor and they tell their pastor, because like the therapist, the pastor's under oath and it's got to stay with me. Now, nobody who knows me today will ever guess who the person was that had a relationship with their dog. And you'll never get it out of me. But that's how weird the world is. Dave 77. Hi, Paul. Would you say that God's plan for humans to merely recover their position or state of being they had in the Garden of Eden? To paraphrase George MacDonald's, man's desire something greater than to restore paradise. I think that's right. He must rise on a yet higher place with attainment of something better than he ever possessed before. I think that's right. Does this ring true for you? This is what Paralandra is about. This is one of the things that C.S. Lewis writes, not just in Paralandra, but also in Narnia. Again, Richard Rohlin, boy, he really nailed a lot of Narnia stuff and a lot of Lewis stuff. That was amazing. With Griz. So, yeah, Grim, you got a great interview out of him. Good job, man. Like I keep saying, people regularly fail to appreciate. People regularly fail to appreciate a lot. So, yeah. Now, how exactly to formulate this theologically? It's really hard. And we don't know how hard it is until we watch a really brilliant guy like C.S. Lewis work on it. And now, don't get me wrong. A lot of the critics of the Space Trilogy have a real point. There's a ton of things that you can poke holes on or criticize with respect to Lewis and Paralandra. But he tried to do something really hard. Most of the time, when people try this, it's really bad. Lewis was really smart in that he basically tried to harvest from classical and medieval literature, all what seemed to be the best wisdom, and put it into, of all things, science fiction. What an audacious thing. And Lewis did this in the 40s. Now, remember, Lewis would continue to grow and mature. And in some ways, Narnia is a product of the more mature Lewis than the space trilogies. So, and from his direct apologetic work. So this was Lewis continuing to grow. But yeah, if Dave, if you want to think about those things, read Paralandra a few times, and you'll begin to see Lewis just basically, here are some of the issues. Maybe it's this way. That's what Lewis is doing in there. Not a question, just a thank you. Going through a tough time with a family health crisis. I'm convinced that the time I've spent in this little corner has built my spiritual resilience, enabling me to support my loved ones in this difficult time. I'm once saved, always saved, squishy Protestant, evangelical, charismatic freak who believes God is not a tame lion. Amen. So while my fellow squishy ones have been pretty gutted by a long series of apparently unanswered prayers for healing, I'm just here to be the love of God for my loved ones. If my loved ones can't see God but can't see me, then that's my responsibility to be the evidence. I'm going to put this on the bigger screen because it's really beautiful. To be the evidence in how God and how I love them. Why? Because of that unfathomable love, perhaps most potently exemplified in what I believe to be the reality of that squishy, once saved, always saved stuff. How dare I deny or take advantage of such unfathomable love? It back. I do not love him to get in return. You're a good reformed person. Amen. Way to go, Christian. My exposure to the plethora of perspectives in this wonderful little corner has made me more aware of the vastness of who God is, what he does, and how his revelation to us image bearers comes in so many diverse forms, perhaps as many forms as there are individuals. So thank you, Papa Paul, for at least being a core inspiration for the spawning of this little spiritual ecosystem. It's really something else. Wow. Gosh, that really touches me. Thank you. I'm going to save that and share that. When I get notes like this, share it with my council because what I do costs my church, and they know it, and they still give it. And so when a little note like, and they still don't understand it. They don't watch this stuff. But they see people come in and visit and they hear things. And so when something like this happens, I share it with them because it helps them see that, yeah, this pastor that you're still paying a salary to, the ministry he's doing online, it's important for some people. And he's doing the work of the church and the work of the Lord on the internet. And so, it could happen that, if I was in another church, I very much would expect the council to sit down and say, Vanderclay, we buy 50 hours a week of yours, and you are not to share that with people online. I could completely believe a council telling me that. We have lots of shut-ins. We have lots of evangelism that needs doing. We have lots of pastoral care. We have lots of sermons. We have all of this stuff. Please focus on your church. That's your job. And this little church has not said that. And so when I get a note like this, I share it with them because what that says to them is you may not understand what Paul is doing, but you've let him do it because you've known him for 20 years and you trust him. And if he says he's doing the work of the Lord, we believe him. But when they see notes like this, and when they see the donations that you guys give to Living Stones, they say, well, if Paul was undermining the gospel, would people be giving money to the church and visiting on Sunday? So if you ever visit Living Stones, you'll get a chance to talk to me. but you'll get a lot more chance to talk to the people of this church. Just thank them for sharing me with you, because they have. And they do it with joy. They don't really know why they're doing or what I'm doing with it. But if you found this little corner helpful, just thank the people of Living Stones, because they've paid for a lot of it. Can a CRC church congregation or class disband female elders or pastors? The way it works in the Christian Reformed Church is that it's the local option. A local Christian Reformed church can elect a woman as deacon, elder, or call a woman as minister. A local classis can decide whether or not to seat women delegates from churches. So in other words, you can have a church that has women office bearers, but their classis says no, and so those women office bearers can't go to that classis. It doesn't happen. I don't think it happens at all in the CRC. Maybe, but it'd be very unusual. At this point, the majority of Christian Reformed Church classes allow women to be seated. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a lot of women there, but they allow women to be seated. And when a majority of classes allowed women to be seated, then it was 2005 that women were first seated at synod as delegates. So it's a local option, but participating in higher structures depends on what those structures have decided. So in the majority of the Christian Reformed Church, you can have women at all levels, even though women are about 15% of CRC clergy, and a far tiny number than that are women senior pastors. And that's been some of the grievance, that even 25 years after women in office, the local option became the rule in the CRC, the vast majority of Christian Reformed churches have men as senior pastors. There are more women in other roles, pastorate roles, but as senior pastors, not as many. That's a big whole other conversation. Pete K, Strange Theology. I remember you using a phrase, and I want to make sure I get it right. Mimetic transformation. I don't think I used that phrase. The idea that we are made in God's image to mimic him and to be like him. I don't use that phrase, but I like the idea. But if we replace God with some other than God, we mimic that thing and are transformed into its likeness. Yeah, I like what you're writing here. If I have this wrong, you see, remember when I talked about projection and listening to me? This is a great example, and it happens with church all the time. I say something that prompts something in you. You think I said it. Whew, I got credit for it. That's kind of nice. But it really came from you. And this is how we think together. See, the projection is actually not a bug, but a feature. Now, like, again, with all this Vervaeke stuff, it cuts both ways. Projections distort, but projections enable synthesis. And see, what this transjective stuff that Vervaeke talks about means is there's actually a middle space between us, and that's a spiritual space. And in that middle space, our spirits mingle and new spiritual things are born. Sometimes they're tiny little things like your mimetic transformation. I might have said it. It's true. I might have said it. But, and the idea I very much agree with. And that's the trickiness of idolatry, that the world is like this. We all get God wrong because God is unfathomable. And so, that's just a reality. But idolatry, if we're really wrong on God, the chief competitor to God is ironically, in some ways, the image of God in us. Because when that image of God gets aspirations to replace the real God, that's when things go bad. And idolatry is just a function of that. So thank you, Christopher. Appreciate it. Okay, I got to keep moving here. Al B, why is it that other people automatically label you a bigot when you voice your disagreement with Pride movement and its associated hedonistic ideologies? It's a rhetorical device. It's a way. Here's the irony. One way of understanding gay liberation is that shame didn't work. So what tool are people using to try to promote the cause of ongoing liberation? Shame. Well, wait a minute. If it didn't work against all those people in the closet, what makes you think it's going to work now? And the truth is, it sort of works. It works in some ways, but shame has a two-edged sword in that, yeah, you might get initial compliance via shame, but you're building up resentment. And if you build up enough resentment over time, the minute you sort of lose power over, yeah, they're going to get revenge. And that's some of what we're seeing. Part of what we're seeing is revenge for years of resentment. But just because, this is another sort of modern fable. And it imagines sort of this imagined human basic decency. Oh, if you were the victim of shame, you'd never use shame against your rivals. Probably not. Part of what you learned when shame was used against you is how potent a weapon it is. And so when you get scared or angry or motivated, you'll probably pick it up. And it's going to have the same dynamics that it had when it was used against you. That's why people wield it. The only true salvation comes from Christ. We know Christ as Christians on a participatory level. But when we try to formulate the propositional, we fall flat. None of us want to see the destructive idolatries continue because we naturally want everyone to share in the only healing that actually works, Christ's. But we are faced with both external resistance and internal ineptitude. How do we overcome? And by the way, this doesn't only apply to the alphabet people. When we see our loved ones struggling with their own mental state or becoming wrapped in political ideologies, we are presented with the exact same problem. What are we to do? The Christian weapon is love. The Christian weapon is love. Now, love can be hard and love can be soft. Love is remarkably hard to wield because love is so costly to wield. But the Christian weapon is love. That's the cross. And love triumphs over the powers and principalities. Because again, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you love. That's how people work. Love is what Vervaeke nails this. It is love that makes us humans. Love grows us up. Go ahead, have that child. The degree of formation or malformation will be directly dependent on your ability to love well. And again, that doesn't mean just love shouldn't be confused with bland acceptance. Bland acceptance can come from indifference, which is the opposite of love. There's a reason Jesus used the father-child or father-son analogy in describing our relationship with God and the power of love. Read the Gospel of John. It is love. It just is love. There is law. Law has its usages. Law is important. But Law only works when it's in service and alignment with love and truth. Read 1 Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a resounding gong or cymbals. If I have the faith to move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor, if I renounce sex, if I renounce everything, and I live in a little hermitage, but have not love, I am wasting my time. Read 1 Corinthians 13. It's all right there. Faith, hope, and love. The big three, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Now, what love means? Love is not bland acceptance or coddling. Love is remarkably difficult. Love is not alone, but love is the chief Christian tool. That is what we use. Paul, I enjoyed your conversation with Chris Kavanaugh and his point about this corner flipping between metaphors and literalisms under the cover of the word symbolism is really good. And I was disappointed that y'all didn't hammer the topic more. It feels like the modernist fundamentalist fight is used as a scapegoat to not address what's going on there. My question for you, is there any way forward? I don't know if I would frame it as metaphors and literalism, because literalism isn't the right word. Probably physicalisms. So I was listening this morning to, I'm re-listening to Peugeot and Rohlin talk about the Grail, and I'm going to be Grail obsessed for a little while probably. And I was really frustrated that the video I released this morning on Mrs. Davis is an attempt to participate in the Grail conversation. I think Rohlin and Peugeot and Tom Holland are right that the Grail conversation is linked to the modernism conversation. When modernists employ symbolism, we have to keep an eye on our modernisms. In other words, the physicalisms that have been reigning for the last couple hundred years through science, you can do the same thing through symbolisms. So you do got to watch that. Now, I've not spent a lot of time in person with Jonathan and John. I'd love to spend more time in person with them. I'd love nothing better than to, we've only done 2 conferences together, the 3 of us. And in those conferences, a lot of that time is on stage, and that's not the same as grabbing a meal together or getting to know each other as regular human beings and doing other things with our bodies at the same time, like paintball and, the kind of stuff Rafe Kelly's working on. But I don't have concerns about Jonathan Peugeot because I've had enough experience with him personally that his symbolism hasn't taken him into a kooky place, and neither is John Vervaeke's. So, no, that's a real important point, David. But in some ways, a big part of the work of this little corner is to figure that out. And you see, someone like Kavanaugh looks to me completely blind to the fact that modernity is ending. Kavanaugh is something like to put it in a CRC metaphor, someone in the Christian Reformed Church in 2019 thinking, oh yeah, the current regime in the Christian Reformed Church is just going to continue. Yeah, it might take a little bit longer, but at some point, the future will look just like I imagine. No. Modernity is going away. And Dr. Jim had it exactly right that the new atheists were part of modernity going away. Richard Rohlin, in his conversation with Grimm, gave a prophecy. He said, this little corner is all playing around with Lewis. Wait till you guys find Shakespeare. And I thought, yeah, Dr. Jim and Cale, they're already there. If this little corner would take a hard turn into Shakespeare, there's plenty of people in this corner that would be like, yeah, now you're speaking my language. We just haven't talked about Shakespeare much. But then again, Lewis, we haven't read Lewis's main book yet. That's still out there. And I've been trying to get my head around that book. We've been playing in the Lewis foothills, and we haven't really gotten into what Lewis thought was the main course. And nobody has. It's just not done. We're playing around with all of Lewis's hobbies. So, yeah, it's a big deal. And in many ways, that's what we're working on. Howdy, Paul. Howdy, Chad. How's your journey over the last years going exploring with this little corner impacted your life and work? Pros and cons, please. For the most part, so in the conversation between Justin and Karen on the meaning code, which is another must-watch conversation, Justin basically did his interview with Karen like he did with me at Living Stones last week. And listening to what Karen said about her journey here has been like mine. I've had some of the most fun in my life playing with you people. It says this has in many ways been a dream come true. It has. I have always wanted to have these conversations. And I couldn't. Not without the internet, not without YouTube. I just couldn't find strange people like yourselves who wanted to talk about these things because they weren't coming to the door of Living Stones and they weren't coming to listen to my sermons. And most of you don't listen to my sermons anyway. I get it. The sermons I preach on Sunday morning are to Christian people who are looking for a particular thing. And I'm giving it to them. It doesn't mean I don't love it. I do love it. They come out of me. They're just as much mine as my other videos that I make. But the videos that I make on my channel are in a different vein and of a different conversation. So, and, somebody asked me, here's an irony. If I hadn't started making videos about Jordan Peterson and this YouTube thing hadn't started and generous people out there among you hadn't been donating to Living Stones would not be here today. This little corner has saved Living Stones financially. Demographically, I don't know if it's going to, we've got, I won't name their names because they're not, a lot of the people who work a lot with the internet don't want to be seen on it. They just use it. But this lovely couple drives in almost every Sunday from Berkeley to be with us. Think about that. How crazy is that? How delightful my church is. They have no idea how much my church loves them just for what they're showing this little church. And those of you who have donated to Living Stones have no idea how grateful my little church is. They have a hard time showing it, but you have kept. There have been days when there's hardly been anybody here, and I think to myself, why are we doing this? Let's just shut it down. And then I look around at the people who are here, and I know if we weren't here on Sunday with just our handful of people, A lot of these people who are now in their 80s, their upper 80s, who have been coming to this church for 40, 50 years, 60 years plus, they wouldn't have anywhere to go to. And they wouldn't be by their friends, and they wouldn't have their pastor. And you people have kept this church alive, and alive financially, and alive in terms of keeping its pastor alive. Because Chad wants me to talk about the late aughts when I was in my Tim Keller phase, because Tim Keller saved this church and saved my faith and saved my sanity in a very hard time in my life. And I'm not going to go into why that time was hard, because if that was in a randos conversation, it wouldn't be recorded. Pastors have secrets too, you know. They're not all that dark, and they're not all that uncommon, but they're there. So, wow. What you and this little corner have done for me and my church, I can't say enough. Cons, they're harder for me to find, but there's some there. There's added chaos to my life. I suspect that whatever happens to Living Stones in the next few years, if Living Stones goes under and I become a celebrity pastor whose relationship with a local church isn't what it has been, and I have to do a lot of traveling. I enjoy traveling. I love going out and doing these trips, but there's a cost. You know, my wife, nothing against any of you, she just doesn't know you. And so the thought of, she's an introvert, thought of going out and spending a couple of weeks meeting new people, having conversations about, so those are hard. But on the whole, way more upside than downside. Reputationally, it hasn't helped my reputation in the Christian Reformed Church. I used to be a good progressive, and now I'm kind to people from Abide. Gosh, what a crazy world. Okay, Chad. Maybe Chad, one day you and I, with no cameras and no mics, we'll have a conversation, and I'll tell you some of my secrets. We still sometimes watch The Bachelor or Bachelorette with some of my adult children, and my son Jared is so funny because the show is basically the modern replication of the town square where they would torture and execute people. Only we do it to our most beautiful single people. But Jared's so funny because, you know, finally when they get the one-on-one date, it's tell me your secrets, me and the Bachelor Nation. It's like, this is insane. It's so bad. Paul, I recently went on a pilgrimage with my church to Israel, and it was very transformative. Have you been? And if so, how has it shaped your faith? I've never been to Israel. If the Israeli contingent of our little corner puts together a thing in February of 2024, then that will be my first trip. And I'll be super excited to go there and meet people like Nehema and Chezi and have people from there show me around. You know, get out your bingo cards. Living in the Dominican Republic, it's a totally different thing going and living there than going to Punta Cana or Puerto Plata in a todo incluido resort place. So to be able to go to Israel and have Israelis give me a sense of their country, what a treat. What a treat. So I hope that happens. We'll see. And of course, Jacob is back there saying, it's going to happen. When you play Dwaro Deep with the Sinners, with Grim Griz, Nate the Grail Country, and Richard Rohlin, will you play the cleric? healer, or do we have to call them little people instead of dwarves? When I played D&D, so I played D&D with 3 high school friends. I was always the fighter. Jeff was always the magic. He was always the magic user. John was always the cleric, and Kurt was often the dungeon master. So, boy, I am so rusty at that. I'm gonna be the dude that gets killed right away, and the rest of the group is gonna be like, why did we bring him? He doesn't know how to do anything. That's what's going to happen. It's going to be keep Vanderclay alive. So recently, when my kids were little, we'd play Age of Empires 2 with my kids, and they were young, and I'd get these PCs and I'd run Ethernet around the house and put it on a little switch and make this little home network, and we'd all battle against each other playing Age of Empires 2. That was a long time ago. Well, Age of Empires 2 is still with us, and my son Jared loves playing Age of Empires 2, and he and Joey decided that they were going to get me up to speed of Age of Empires 2. And Joey and Jared have continued to play, and they play, on the internet, yada, 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 yada. And what Jared had to realize is that when Dad was an adult and Jared was a boy, Dad was he could just be a beast at Age of Empires, and it would be Dad versus Philip and Jared on Age of Empires, and Dad would beat them, and wow, Dad was amazing. And now Dad hasn't played those kind of computer games in years, and so Dad is bad at it. And I finally told Joey and Jared, I don't have enough time for you guys to bring me up to speed on this. And odds are good at my age, I'll never catch up with you because you guys have put hundreds of hours into this game. And I don't see hundreds of hours in my near future to devote to pushing these little pixels around a screen. That's just the way it is. Every now and then I can enjoy a little bit of guilty pleasure playing some Civ 6. And the only reason I agreed to play with you guys is because I love you guys. And to me, it sounds like tremendous fun playing a game with Nate and Griz and Richard. That sounds like a hoot of a good time. But I, my friends, will be a liability. I tell you that right now. So there. If I die off in the first battle of the first campaign, I won't be surprised. Aaron, what are your thoughts about Bishop Maximus, John Vervaeke conversations? They were amazing. That was really cool. Again, those are some of the videos that if I'd had more time to make commentary videos, I certainly would have. There are tons of good stuff in there. Part of the reason I do commentary videos is because I watch a video once, and then I might watch it twice. But when Richard Rohlin talked about that synthesis, that's what I'm doing with my commentary videos. And Grimm nailed it. I mean, like Grimm in that conversation is telling my secrets. Oh, you mean Paul Vanderclay is doing synthesis in front of us and other people are starting channels to try it? Yep. That's exactly what this little corner is doing and has been doing all along. We are trying to do synthesis, and we're doing it because Papa Peterson was doing synthesis about the Bible on stage in Toronto. So, yeah, I do commentary videos because, a lot of times people say, I snicker when I look at comments in the stream. A lot of times people complain about my commentary, Peter. You're rambling and rambling. I'm doing my synthesis in front of you. I'm getting new ideas as I am once again going through Mrs. Davis because I don't really have time to watch it 3 times in a row. So if I can make a video and have excuse to watch it again. See, most video people, they do all of this preparation, and then the video is a presentation. That's great. I love it. But all the conversations in this little corner and my commentary videos, these are all synthesis. And I'm just doing it with the camera on. And in that way, Ethan, Ethan's comment here, I didn't know anything about Twitch when I started my channel, but I knew what was happening on Twitch. I didn't know how to use it. And Jared was watching Twitch-like things. No, I haven't. I watched people watching video games, and that's synthesis too, because they like the video game and they're trying to get better, and so they're learning. That's just what they're doing. It's the same thing that happens when NFL or NBA players watch game tapes. So I watched Peterson do his biblical series, and I knew what was happening with respect to Twitch and games. And so I thought to myself, I wonder if people would watch while I thought out loud about Jordan Peterson's biblical commentary, because I want to think about this more, but I can't justify spending more hours focusing on this. And so when I make a video commentary, I can focus on something in a way that I usually won't allow myself the time to do it, because most of the video content I consume is done while I'm making breakfast, cleaning the house, attending to the car, driving somewhere, working in the yard, like most of you. That's and that's sort of the grazing. I'm sort of overviewing. But I didn't have time to sit in my office and watch videos and take notes. I had stuff to do. But if watching a video can become a ministry, and hence the commentaries were born, and the commentaries beget the randos conversations, and we're third lobing it together. Again, Griz has this corner nailed. He does. He's right there at the center of it. And he knows what we're doing. And he's saying it to us in all of his genius, unintelligible ways with his quirky branding and memes and cleverness. That's what he's doing. But that's what we're doing. So I noticed in the comments there that Vervaeke expressed agreement with the idea that Peterson should also be engaged with these subjects, especially the participatory aspects, and also finding Peterson's current trajectory aggressive and off-putting. Yeah. Currently, I am not watching hardly any of Jordan's videos. I watch one when someone from this little corner says, oh, you should see when Jordan talked to. So I listened to the Metaxas video. There are a few things in there that I kind of sparked some things, but most of it was just kind of culture warrior pablum. And even if you agree with it, it's all map territory. It's all stuff we've heard before, and it's stuff you can find on 1,000 other channels. I'm not interested in that. When Jordan Peterson, as I know he wants to, as I know he does, as I know he still can, and as I know he, if Jonathan is on with him, if Peter Kreeft is on with him, if someone is on with him that is getting him talking about what he, I think, has been super helpful with, I'll watch, I'll listen, I'll comment. I love the Exodus seminar. More of that, please. Yeah, I'm with Vervaeke on this. But I don't think, so Justin asked me about this, and this is what I told Justin in my interview with him. What you have to understand about Justin in these interviews, he might use seconds or a couple of minutes from a half hour, an hour of talking. That's the process of making a documentary. Justin also told me, lower everybody's expectations with respect to this. This might not happen. And that's true. Jordan Peterson, people have written Jordan Peterson off. Don't do that. He's still working on this stuff. The book he's working on is about this stuff. He is, think about it this way. If you never watch my rough drafts for Sundays, what I'm doing on Sunday is in some ways analogous to what Jordan is doing with respect to all of his culture war videos. Doesn't mean he doesn't believe it. He believes in it sincerely. Is he paying the rent? Yeah. He's paying the rent on Daily Wire. Daily Wire is getting exactly what they've paid for. He has a day job. Jordan Peterson's day job was university professor and clinical psychologist. I really wish he could have stayed there. And I think part of him does too. Now, he's got lots of more opportunities now that he's really enjoying, and I'm not going to begrudge him any of his money or any of those opportunities. And I'm going to the ARC thing in the UK, and I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to be there with eyes wide open, probably my mouth shut, because politics for the most part is not my game, but I'm really curious about what's going on. And I'll be far more interested in the people that are there than in what the place actually accomplishes, because that's how I am. Jordan is like a tide. He comes into this estuary and he goes out of this estuary. He comes into this estuary and he goes out of this estuary. And every time he comes into it, he brings in new nutrients, new little sea animals, a few sea monsters, and a whole lot of more interesting fish. And then he goes out again. And then he comes in and he goes out. He comes in, he goes out. That's Jordan Peterson's role in this little corner. And it's a vital role. It's a critical role. Every estuary needs the tides, and Jordan Peterson is the tide. And he comes in and he comes out. And when he gives us attention, he blesses us. And when he recedes, he's out there in the ocean doing his ocean things. So for me, that's Jordan. And it's almost like saying, I wish the tide were always in. No. Again, Grimm nailed this too. Grimm is right in that this little corner would not be this little corner if the Jordan Peterson tide that came in 2016, 2017, 2018 hadn't receded in 2019. When the tide receded, all the little estuary pools, all these little tidal pools had all these little interesting creatures in, and all the little crabs were eating all the little nutrients, and all the little fish were feeding off all of the nutrients. And because we had that moment of sort of the still quiet bowl, and we're all doing our little thing. And then 2021, Jordan Peterson comes in again. Whoosh. All kinds of new things come in. And then Peterson and Peugeot have their big conversation. Their first one back in. And then we had the Four Horsemen video. And then we had the Exodus seminar. And then the tide goes out. And then we're like, well, where's Peterson? I don't know. The tide is out. But we're going to keep working on all the little things here. And then when Peterson finally does his standalone Exodus series then the tide will come washing in again. So Peterson is like the tide. He comes in and out. And estuaries need tides. So God bless them. Don't curse the pattern. We need the pattern. If Peterson were always here, we'd have trouble doing some of the things we do. So his coming in and going out is actually a feature, not a bug. So that's my take on it. Crap, I'm over time. Oh, well, I was late. Any thoughts on the Noah Hyde subject between Jacob and Father Stephen? I haven't had time to watch that. I saw Cedric. Oh no. What have I done to my church? I've let a sea monster like Jacob Faturechi into the Christian Reformed Church. And it's sort of like these seals you watch swimming up the Sacramento River, and it's like this far from the ocean. That's what it's like finding Jacob having conversations with Christian Reformed ministers. It's like this far from the ocean. And then Jacob would say, I drove you to Calvin to go to Synod. You practically invited me up the river. So yeah. We've got a Faturechi up the Christian Reformed River. And boy, that's going to be fun. I think some of these guys talking to Jacob are going to be like, what have I gotten myself into? But that's what estuaries are for. You know, if you didn't have an estuary, Cedric Parcells would never get a chance to wrangle with a sea monster like Jacob. This is what makes it fun. Oh, I love it. I love it. See, Chad, it's great. It's great. Paul, I really like your recent Paralander video where you explain how the unman shows itself through Weston. It was frightening and interesting to think about, specifically how the stories are repeated over and over. How can we break out of the restrictive stories that repeat over and over in our lives? Well, so again, the Grim Griz Richard Rohlin, that one might become canonical. We won't know it until after a while, but Richard nailed that point too. In this little corner, we do a lot of talking about. That's just sort of the synthesis thing. And what, you know, where Richard and Jonathan have really been leaning into is the story making and the storytelling. So when we were up in Thunder Bay and Jonathan was telling me about the fairy tale stuff, I said, yeah, definitely do the fairy tale stuff. And what Richard talked about with respect to fairy tales in his conversation with Grimm was dead on. So I've had 5 children and we homeschooled our children. And as a pastor, I've had a lot of experience doing children's education, because the truth is, when you're just getting started, even before you get to seminary or college, if you're in the church and you're a faithful person in the church, at least in terms of Protestant churches, you're going to wind up teaching Sunday school, which means you're going to wind up spending a lot of time with children. I spent years in Peterson teaching day camp, you know, these little kids right off the street. And I had a group of 12 of them. And in the summer, basically teaching them Bible stories. And you learn doing this. And what Richard described with respect to how children learn is dead on right. It's amazing. I mean, and what Richard said about the way modern education is working, he's also dead on right. If you understand children and you look at so much of what a lot of modern education is doing, you're hard pressed to imagine that what they're not trying to do is to keep children as sheeple. It's horrible. Yeah, what Richard said about textbooks is true. It's true. And that's why the wealthiest, wokest, most powerful rulers of our world want a Waldorf education for their children. Well, that's strange. Do a little look into Rudolf Steiner. Why do they want a Waldorf education for their children? Why do they want to keep the screens away from their children? Because while on one hand they're practicing mind control over the general population, they love their children. And so they're teaching them fairy tales and mythology and stories and it's not direct. Look at what Tim Keller said about children's education. You'd probably have a hard time finding it. He only talked about it a few minutes. He said, this is a PCA, mind you. Children's education in church should be Bible stories. When Protestant megachurch curriculum got a hold, when the seeker movement got a hold of that, and when they started sort of intertwining, it was exactly being mirrored in public school. We can't teach people those old stories because those old stories are full of problematic elements. So what we're going to do is teach our children directly morality. And you know what? That's not how morality is learned. Richard Rohlin nailed it in that video. Children absorb from their environment. They don't take it in consciously. It's the blindness of modernity that everyone imagine that the world is flat. Faturechi says that very well. Knowledge is flat. The world is flat. It's all open. It only looks flat because you've got a monarchical vision and you're looking down at it. That's why it looks flat. When you're on the ground, it's full of complexity. So how do children learn? Children learn the way they've learned forever. And the truth is, and one of the things you learn when you homeschool your kids is that children will learn, just get out of the way. And now there's ways that you can help them. You can feed them. It's like getting a fish. And you look at this fish and you think, how is the fish going to eat? I know. I will grab the fish with my hand and I will poke food in its mouth. That's what modern education does with children. And it's stupid. How do you get the fish to eat? The fish is going to eat. Put eatable food in its environment and it will eat. Children are going to learn. Give them a learning-rich environment and they will learn. Give them an impoverished environment and they will learn too. You just won't like what comes out of it. So that's how to train children. And what question was I answering? Gosh, this is a really bad ranty video. Yeah, the restrictive stories. Tell good stories. Give your children good stories. Raid the bins of libraries in districts because so many of them are throwing out all the good books. Right now, in some places, if you say something like Little House on the Prairie, have them read Huck Finn. They're not going to know what Jim Crow is. They're not going to know what slavery was if you don't let them read primary materials from the age. Have them read slave biographies. Have them, don't watch the movie 12 Rules a Slave. Read the book. Don't listen to about Frederick Douglass. Read Frederick Douglass. Everything that Richard said there. Have people read primary source materials. They will learn, and they will learn from the people of that era what the world was like. And it looks very different from what this pre-chewed baby food that we take the fish out of the aquarium and we stuff its mouth with. Those fish are going to die. I'm so frustrated by this kind of thing. And, this world is doing a number on people. It always has. It always does. But we have forgotten so much wisdom. So find a school district that's getting rid of a lot of the problematic books that weren't problematic 10 years ago. And you can get them for free. Have them read Little House on the Prairie. Have them read 12 Rules a Slave. Have them read Huck Finn. Have them read Shakespeare. Have them read all of that. They will learn. And, and we had my same conversation with Emma. And, again, and some of the Christians, like, I was talking about with Richard too, some of the Christians okay, mimetic rivalry, you become like your rival. And that's the dumbest thing about the way so many Christians fight the culture war. Don't do it that way. Give your kids good books to read. Rant over. Next question. I got to land the plane on this at some point. What are your thoughts about usury? Should it be made illegal? Talked about it a long time yesterday at a local estuary. That's interesting. I have a sneaking suspicion that your conversation with Peugeot has led you to appreciate icons. My relationship with icons is complex. Are you hiding an icon corner behind your camera? No, there are no icons in my office. On my trip to Europe, someone gave me an icon. It was a very generous gift. It is not in my office. I have a very complex conversation with that and also with usury. John Calvin basically changed theology, probably reflected what a lot of people were thinking but not daring to say. There's interest and there's interest. You can find in Thou Shalt Not Steal the treatment of that in the Heidelberg Catechism, warnings against basically abusive money lending and usury. These payday check cashing places in my neighborhood. Yeah, that's abusive. You're taking advantage of poor people. But when I buy a car or a house, I don't have a problem paying interest on my car or my house. If you're borrowing money to use the money to make more money, you should share the return, and interest is a way that return is managed. So the basic rule, Calvin's position was, if someone needs to borrow from you to survive, don't charge them any interest. Those payday loans should be zero interest. All the payday loan shops would close tomorrow. If credit card interest, same thing. There's something about the modernist imagination that thinks that law is the solution to everything. And law isn't. So I would be against making usury illegal, but I think we should have a cultural conversation about interest. With the homeless people, when they ask for money, if I have it, I usually give it to them. And some of them pay me back and some of them don't. That's what I do. What do you think? Who do you think will win the MMA match between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg? Zuckerberg is younger. You know, people like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg are rare cats. They're really unusual. They might be pillowy, nerdy people, but you don't know. So I guess I would probably, in terms of who I think seems tougher, I would think Elon Musk. But Zuckerberg is younger, and Zuckerberg is more secretive. When you look at Zuckerberg, it's like, what's going on? As a pastor, I look at these two, and Elon is like an open book. Elon will tell you exactly what he thinks. Elon will go on Rogan and smoke a blunt. That's Elon. If I was in a room with both of these guys in a conflictive situation, I'd be way more concerned about Zuckerberg. He's quieter. He's robotic. What's going on back there? So part of me would say, oh, Musk, because he's out there. But I'd be more worried about Zuckerberg because what's going on behind that robotic facade? There. That's my answer. All right. Was there anything I should have answered from the live stream? I've paid no attention to it because I wanted to get through everything else. Oh, what did I do again? Did I rant again? Oh, I preached again? Oh. Any questions from here before I sign off? I'll give it 6 more minutes. Musk is toast. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't have time to really bring anybody into the room. Yes, just hire cats. Beware of the smile. Lizards, not cats. Musk is going down. When is this thing supposed to happen? Oh, Cassidy. Questions. Here we go. What would Zuckerberg tell the Babylon Bee? Would Zuckerberg have anything interesting to say? Musk is way more entertaining. Yes. Well, yes and no. Again, it's like the fish. Listen to my conversation with Richard, because and my conversation with Emma. Their parents had very similar philosophies to what my wife and I had. Fill the fish tank with healthy things. I wouldn't be, the truth is, so television, for example. My wife was having a conversation with someone about child rearing, and the person said, well, you can't control what your children watch on TV. What? You can totally control what your children watch on TV. When we moved back to North America, and when we had a TV, which isn't an absolute necessity to have in your house, by the way, I hooked it up to a TiVo, and even though we had basic cable, I only programmed the channels that I wanted to have access into the house, and I only recorded what I wanted my children to watch. So, at some point, the kids are going to grow up to learn enough to figure out the TiVo. But while they're young, they're dumb. And so, yeah, they could watch limited amounts of television. They watched what we would let them watch. And if you feed them good things when they're young, they will be able to understand what bad books are and identify them. Now, as part of youth, they will read bad books. You can imagine little puerile Richard Rohlin reading in Paralandra because it's in the forbidden book section of his mama's library. So they'll find bad books, but just fill your house with good ones, and then they'll be able to learn the difference between good ones and bad. Hope Elon will surprise you. Will you vote for Cornel West? No. Paul, is there a blasphemous element to portraying Jesus? How far is too far? Any non-canonical portrayal of Jesus is potentially blasphemous. That doesn't mean that all of them are. I enjoyed Anne Rice's book about Jesus. I'm sure there's some blasphemy in it. What should I ask Cedric for the randos conversation on Monday? Oh, Faturechi. I don't know why I let this sea monster into the Christian Reform stream. I hear he did some Phlebas loved that conversation, and I hear he did some biography in it. I don't know Cedric hardly at all. Cedric is a transplant into the CRC. He's not a cradle CRCer, so he's different. So I don't know. I don't know Cedric, but Cedric has done the denomination a service by a lot of the work that he's done in church order stuff. So I appreciate Cedric. He's always been an interesting guy to the degree that I've known it. I want to fight in the Colosseums. Warning an abolition ban about bad books. Do you listen to every Rest is History episode, Paul? I have listened to almost all of them. I get a little behind, but then I catch up and I go through a streak. I have listened to better than 95, probably more than 95% of them. Cast out set. Tarantino's mother told him she is more worried about the violence on the news than in movies. Yeah. Which C.S. Lewis book is the main course? This one. No, I can't hide the face. English literature in the 16th century. My particular copy I bought used was owned by A.J. Yockers Jr. February 1957. This is, the book came out, completion of the Clark Lectures, Trinity College, Cambridge, 1944, Oxford at Clarendon Press. I bought this copy used. Trying to see, this is printed in the UK. Trying to see which printing this is. So Lewis, if you read Lewis biographies, the books we read were just his playthings with the Inklings. He was just having fun with his friends in his nerdy way, just like you all do with your little internet nerddoms. But Lewis was a brilliant man. This was what he spent all of his time working on. Now, maybe it was a waste of time because nobody's reading it. I don't know if I'll be able to understand it. I've taken a crack at the introduction several times and still wrestling with it. But this is Lewis's main work, and nobody talks about it. Let's see. If some random makes an interesting enough series on YouTube on George MacDonald's writing, would you dive in? I don't know. I have a lot. I have a lot of George MacDonald work to do just on his writings. Dialogos isn't just within a conversation. It's above all of our conversations. And the spirits that are directing the big currents are also directing this little corner. Angels are at work here, my friends. And a few demons too, probably. It's a bloody hard book to tackle. I listened to the whole thing and my mind bounced right off it. Yeah, that's true. You are. I should start a library. I already have a library. That's right. You are my library. Let's see. Oh, A Grief Observed, the little book Lewis wrote right after his wife died, is a rare glimpse at his inner thought process. Yeah. I've read that book a number of times. Lewis. Oh, Lewis. Lewis, the spirit of C.S. Lewis. So I've told the story enough. When I started with Peterson, I was anxious because I knew I'd be vulnerable in some ways and to some things, and sort of like Dante with Virgil or Lewis with MacDonald, I wanted a guide because I knew I would be heading out and that there'd be sea monsters and precipices and things that were more difficult than I. And so I needed a guide. And so I chose Clive Staples Lewis. And I said, Lewis, you will be my guide as I wrestle with Peterson and whatever else comes through that door and whatever else the tide brings in. And so Lewis has been a good guide. And in some ways, Lewis has been a guide for this corner, and he continues to be. So, yeah, the Great Divorce moved me greatly. Nobody talks about it here. English in the 16th century is still one of the standard texts used today. Wow. Yeah. That's probably something that we need someone like Dr. Jim or Cal to sort of lead us through, someone who really knows English literature well, and I don't. All right. It's 12:35. This has gone on far too long. Thank you all for joining me today. Sorry I'm not bringing anybody in. And Yeah, Lewis is occupying the role of a saint. He is for Protestant churches, English in the English language world. He still is. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for all of you who've joined, my new members. Again, I mean, so there are 3 levels again. There's the $2.99 level, which is like, that's basically throwaway money. And then there's that, and I'm already over my 30, so Google owes me $1,000. I just think that's hilarious. I told my sister that Google offered me this, and she was pissed because she's doing YouTube for the money much more than I am. And my sister, who does the Primitive Home with Ann Clay, she does a lot of merch, and she does interesting merch. So I might, I was thinking the other day that I might get into the merch game, but I want to do it differently. And my sister is an artist, and so I might figure out sort of a profit sharing arrangement with my sister, and maybe do some fun things. She's, of course, zero into, some of you might have noted the comment she made on one of my CRC videos. I guess she started going back and forth with some people, including Phlebas. She said, "Who's Phlebas?" Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Wooden shoes. Let's do some wooden shoes. So yeah, this is the last Q&A until September, first week of September. Again, between July 17 and August 17, I have no idea what's going to come out on this channel. It might be some really weird stuff. Maybe I'll just put the weird stuff in for the members. I don't know. But PVK shirt. Yeah, but the problem is I don't know what I'd put on that t-shirt. Got some matching. Oh, socks. Socks could be fun. Anyway, so I'm going to figure that. I mean, for me, again, for Lewis, for me, my ministry has been my 16th century. That has been that big book for Lewis. That's been my ministry. And for me, all this stuff is like the Inklings. I mean, you all are my Inklings, which is weird because we're doing it this way, but that's the way it goes. So whoosh, whoosh. I'd go for socks. All right. I'll talk to my sister. Maybe we can do socks. So thank you all for watching. It's time that I shut up, and I got other work to do. So thank you for being here. And as always, it's a pleasure. And I'll see you again when I see you again.